If you're out there, Mama, your family needs you to come back. That simple, aching plea captures everything about a woman the world is only now beginning to know. Not through a case file or a missing person flyer, but through the kind of life that leaves fingerprints on everyone it touches. Nancy Guthrie was the architecture of her family. She raised 3 children, Annie, Cameron, and Savannah, largely by herself after losing her husband Charles far too early. And she did it without complaint, without hesitation, without ever once making her children feel the weight of what she was carrying alone. She never sought another partner. She never stopped being present. Every birthday was remembered. Every quiet heartbreak her kids tried to hide was somehow felt by her anyway. For 84 years, she showed up. To church, to Sunday dinners, to school plays, to grandchildren's milestones. Operating from a deep and unshakable conviction that human beings were, at their core, worth believing in. She built her life in Tucson, Arizona, where the desert rolls out endlessly under a wide, indifferent sky. Her home was unpretentious. Her world was rich. Her youngest daughter, Savannah, had grown into one of the most trusted faces in American broadcasting, a co-anchor of NBC's Today Show recognized by millions every morning. But in the grammar of their relationship, Savannah was simply Nancy's daughter, and Nancy was simply her mother. That bond, the most ordinary and most sacred thing in either of their lives, is exactly what makes what happened next so devastating. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, Nancy took an Uber to the home of her eldest daughter Annie and Annie's husband, Tommaso Chioni, for dinner. By every available account, the evening was completely unremarkable. They shared a meal. They talked. Nothing about those hours suggested that the night would eventually be picked apart by federal investigators, broadcast to a horrified nation, and dissected by millions of strangers online. Sometime around 9:50 in the evening, Tommaso drove Nancy home and watched her walk toward her front door. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw her alive. By the following morning, the silence surrounding Nancy had become impossible to ignore. Church friends couldn't reach her. Calls piled up unanswered. A neighbor registered the particular kind of stillness that a neighborhood notices before it fully understands what it means. When the family was alerted, when Savannah Guthrie learned, mid-career, mid-broadcast, midlife, that her 84-year-old mother had simply ceased to exist within the normal rhythms of the world, everything stopped. Law enforcement arrived, then the FBI, then the entire country leaned in. A $1 million reward was announced and anonymous contributors added to it. Volunteers fanned out across desert terrain and organized search grids. The local sheriff held press conferences. True crime communities erupted overnight with theories, accusations, coordinates, and a hunger for answers that occasionally consumed people who had no connection to the case whatsoever. And threading through all of it, surfacing again and again no matter which direction the investigation turned, was the name of the man who had been the last to see her. Tommaso Chioni, her son-in-law, her daughter's husband, the person who had driven her home and watched her walk to her door. Consider that drive for a moment, a dark Tucson street in January. Headlights moving through the quiet. An elderly woman in the passenger seat, perhaps tired, perhaps perfectly content, perhaps saying something entirely ordinary about the evening they had just shared. And beside her, the man who knew those streets, who knew that house, who pulled up to that curb and, according to his own account, watched her go inside. What passed between them in those final moments? What were the last words exchanged? Investigators needed to know that answer badly, because when they began reconstructing the timeline of Nancy's disappearance, the story Tommaso told them did not hold its shape under pressure. Surveillance footage captured near the neighborhood revealed movement patterns and vehicle activity that raised questions investigators could not set aside. Then came something that fundamentally altered the investigation's temperature: the discovery of blood evidence. During forensic searches of property connected to Annie and Tommaso, conducted not once but twice, with fresh personnel and fresh equipment each time, investigators reportedly uncovered findings significant enough to change the nature of what they were dealing with. The kind of discovery that makes experienced detectives pause and immediately call their supervisors. The kind that quietly transforms a missing person inquiry into something far more serious and far more irreversible. For a brief and agonizing period, a different explanation gripped the public. Ransom notes had appeared. Messages suggesting Nancy was alive somewhere, held against her will, that this was a kidnapping with negotiable terms. The FBI redirected resources. Mexican authorities were contacted. Nancy's family absorbed every word of those communications as though they were oxygen, because in a very real sense, they were. The possibility that she was out there, reachable, returnable, was the only thing standing between them and the full weight of what they feared. And then investigators discovered that one of those ransom notes was a fabrication. A California man was charged with federal crimes for impersonating a kidnapper. for manufacturing false communications that sent law enforcement chasing invented leads while the actual truth waited somewhere in the dark. The emotional devastation that revelation delivered to the Guthrie family is almost impossible to calculate. They had been holding tightly to the thread of possibility, and that thread turned out to belong to a fraud. What replaced it was a silence more frightening than any demand could have been. In that silence, the scrutiny surrounding Tommaso Cioni intensified considerably. His vehicle sat in an evidence impound facility. His home had been searched on 2 separate occasions. His bandmate, a completely uninvolved man whose only connection to the case was a shared stage, was harassed so aggressively by online vigilantes that he was eventually forced to address the public just to protect his own safety. The New York Times documented it. The nation watched with discomfort as the true crime community's desperate appetite for resolution began inflicting real damage on people who had nothing whatsoever to do with Nancy's disappearance. Federal agents reportedly kept Tommaso in an interview room for 6 hours. 6 hours of methodical, trained, relentless questioning, walking through every minute of his evening. The dinner, the route home, every stop, every turn, every moment between 9:50 p.m. and the following morning when the alarm was finally raised. According to sources who later reviewed the recorded footage, that interview revealed inconsistencies, not minor ones, not the kind that get explained away. The kind that attorneys reviewing the case's publicly known details flagged with specific concern. 6 distinct moments where his account failed to align cleanly with physical evidence, surveillance data, or what other witnesses could corroborate. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos walked a careful line in his public statements. He acknowledged the intense national focus on Tommaso. He urged restraint. He described the investigation as layered and ongoing. Careful public language rarely tells the complete story. In this case, the complete story had not yet been fully assembled. Forensic analysis takes time. DNA processing takes time. Building a case capable of surviving a courtroom takes real, painstaking, unglamorous time. Law enforcement, to their evident credit, refused to move before they were prepared to move correctly. Through all of it, Savannah Guthrie kept appearing in public. She posted videos asking for her mother's return. She announced the reward with a voice that held steady when it had every right not to. She showed up, kept showing up, because showing up under impossible circumstances was precisely what Nancy had spent a lifetime demonstrating for her. But underneath every composed public statement was a daughter who did not know whether her mother was breathing. A woman whose sister's home, whose sister's husband, sat at the center of a federal investigation. The particular private devastation of that position. Knowing what investigators had found, knowing what was asked inside that room for 6 hours, still having to face her own sister, is not something any professional training addresses. Her brother Cameron, a retired F-16 pilot professionally conditioned to function under extreme duress, stood beside her and directed 4 words into the void of a watching nation. "Prove you have our mom." 4 words that carry the full gravity of a family still fighting, still refusing to surrender the possibility that she was alive somewhere, still demanding that whoever was responsible acknowledge her existence. Those 4 words are not dramatic. They are not rhetorical. They are the sound of children who were taught by their mother that you keep showing up, that the people you love are always worth fighting for, that you do not go quiet simply because the situation demands it. There is a specific cruelty attached to the grief of the missing. Something slower and more corrosive than the sharp finality of confirmed loss. It does not arrive cleanly. It settles in suspension, somewhere between hope and devastation, refusing to resolve into either. You wake up without knowing. You sleep without knowing. The not knowing becomes its own kind of wound, invisible and continuing. That was the territory the Guthrie family occupied for days, and then for weeks, while the search extended into its 4th week and hundreds of law enforcement personnel combed the vast Arizona landscape without finding the answer they were all searching for. The desert did not offer anything up. It rarely does. If this investigation ultimately leads to charges, a trial, a conviction, and a sentence that permanently removes Tommaso Cioni from ordinary life, then the question at the center of the story becomes almost unbearable. Will Nancy still be alive to know? Not because forgiveness is expected, not because family bonds operate rationally under these conditions, but because hope, however fractured, however battered by fraudulent ransom notes and 2-week silences and 6-hour interviews, still insists on holding open that possibility. And if she is out there, then the moment a judge reads that sentence aloud becomes the moment 2 lives, which intersected so catastrophically on a January night in Tucson, are permanently and irreversibly separated from each other. No screenwriter manufactures that particular cruelty. It simply exists. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The investigation continues. The desert keeps its silence, and somewhere, in Arizona, across a border, in a location no search team has yet reached, is an 84-year-old woman who raised 3 children alone, who sat in the front pew every Sunday, who cooked dinners and watched grandchildren grow, and believes stubbornly in the fundamental goodness of people. She deserves to be found. And the more people who know her story, the greater the possibility that someone somewhere is sitting on the one piece of information that changes everything. Silence is precisely what whoever is responsible is counting on. We owe it to Nancy to refuse them that.